Dolby Atmos music delivery specs. Are you as excited as I am? Today, I want to talk about something that I think gets overlooked by a lot of people getting into Dolby Atmos. When I get sent mixes from new Atmos mixers to kind of critique and evaluate, the very first thing I look at is, does the mix meet Dolby's delivery specs requirements for Dolby Atmos? And in most cases, they don't. So today, if you have trouble sleeping, you can watch this video. Or if you want information on Dolby Atmos delivery specs. First of all, what is a delivery spec? Delivery specs or delivery specifications, they're basically technical requirements for audio that you are delivering. If you're doing stuff for TV, there are some kind of strict specifications that you have to adhere to. And now, if you are doing any kind of Dolby Atmos mixing for music, there are some specific specs that we have to meet when we are delivering an Atmos music mix. Where do you get the delivery specs? Well, if you're working with a label, labels should be giving them to you. Maybe not necessarily the indie labels, but if you're working with any kind of major label, they've got a sheet somewhere of their delivery specs. If you are working with an independent artist, someone who is kind of self-financing their release, the delivery specs you want to use are going to be the specs for whatever the distributor is. So if they're going with DistroKid or CD Baby, well, CD Baby isn't doing Atmos right now, but whoever the distributor is, they probably have their own set of delivery specs that you're going to need to adhere to. In most cases, though, they're going to be Apple Music's delivery specs. I haven't found Amazon's, but Apple Music publishes theirs. So where do you get them? Well, Dolby actually has a page on their website. I will put a link to this page for Dolby's website. I'll put it down in the comments, scattered amongst the affiliate links that I have down there, which, by the way, clicking on those and following those helps support me, helps support the channel. But I'll put the link down there so you don't have to copy it off of the video. You can just scroll down there and click on that link. And while you're there, click on an affiliate link too. So let's take a look at some of these specs. We'll start with Apple, and you can see here on Dolby's page, they also have links for Sony Music and Universal. Universal's specs tend to be the pickiest, so we'll take a look at those after we look at the Apple Music ones. One thing I should mention, in terms of the specs we're going to look at today, I am recording this in February of 2025. You're going to have to check and see what's current because these specs do change a little bit here and there. They've pretty much stayed the same for a long time, but they do change a little bit here and there, especially when you are looking at individual labels. I have seen changes with those, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. So just keep that in mind as we're looking at these. All right, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to hit the big ones. First of all audio must be 24-bit 48K. Atmos right now, 48K, 24-bit. Some labels are taking 96K masters for archival purposes, but in general, Atmos is 48K for the time being for all releases. So you have to deliver a 48K 24-bit ADM. You must conform and sync the Atmos file with the stereo reference files for the same project. This gets a little trickier in a minute, but let's not worry about that too much. The integrated loudness value should not exceed -18 LKFS measured as per ITU-R BS 1770-4. What the heck is that? If you're not familiar with doing loudness measurements for these, you need a loudness meter. It needs to conform to that ITU standard. That's basically the method of measuring the loudness. There have been different versions of this. That's what the -4 is. It's like the fourth revision or fourth version of it, basically. All it added was, I think, stuff for immersive, basically. But in this case, it doesn't even matter for us because the loudness measurement for Dolby Atmos is done off of a 5.1 re-render. Why do we use the 5.1 and not like a 7.14 or some other thing? I don't know exactly. If I had to guess, it's because when Dolby Atmos first launched, 5.1 was the predominant immersive format at the time, and there were existing loudness measurement specs for 5.1. So Atmos just incorporates 5.1. I haven't seen a lot of meters that really do loudness for immersive. I'm sure they're out there. If any of them do it, I would guess the Nugent one does it. But in general, 5.1 is what we're using for our loudness measurement. Now, there are 3 types of loudness measurements that we can get from a loudness meter. In fact, let me pull up a loudness meter so that we can talk about these. The first type of loudness measurement we can make is what we call a momentary measurement. This is basically looking at, I think it's 300, maybe 400 milliseconds of audio. It looks at a window of time and averages it over that. So it's more of a kind of immediate average of what's going on with the loudness in your mix. What you would see on the momentary loudness meter, it's going to be probably similar to like a Duro. If you had a Duro meter, it's fairly close to that. Not exactly because of the loudness measurement. I'm not going to get too into the way all of that works, but just if you're looking for comparison, momentary, it's similar to like a Duro. Next, we have our short-term loudness measurement. This looks at 3 seconds of audio. Finally, we have our integrated loudness measurement, and the integrated measurement is over the entire program. All audio that has been played through the meter to that point in time, the integrated measurement is an average measurement of everything. And the integrated measurement is what's important for our Dolby Atmos specs. So with Atmos, our integrated loudness, it needs to be neg 18 or less. Why is it neg 18? There's a couple of reasons. Number one, we need to have headroom in our mixes so that we can fold the whole thing down. If we start nuking our mix like we do with stereo mixes for playing the loudness game, when we fold that down from all the multiple channels and objects in Atmos, if we fold that down with everything nuked, it's going to blow up the stereo mix when it gets down to there. So part of that is so that we can fold everything down. The other reason that I heard from Will Kennedy is when Dolby was coming up with the original recommendations, which eventually became the delivery specs for Dolby Atmos for music. One of the things they found is when you have music or just audio in general, if you are sending something at a level above neg 14, LUFS, LKFS, LUFS, LKFS, they're the same thing, by the way. If the audio is above neg 14, LUFS, LKFS, it tends to distort or start to distort consumer grade headphone amplifiers. So yeah, all our loudness squashed mixes that we've been doing, I mean, guilty as charged. All of that stuff we've been delivering that is distorted, because distortion is a natural part of bringing that stuff up that loud. We've been getting distortion on top of that thanks to the quality of consumer grade headphone amps. Yeah, awesome. Part of why Atmos probably sounds better on headphones is because we're not slamming the crap out of it, and we have to maintain things to these levels. So anyways, that's part of why that spec is there. True peak level should not exceed neg 1 dB. True peak, again, all has to do with folding things down. Basically, loudness requirement. We have to have an integrated value of neg 18. We can't go over that. You can go below that. You just can't go over it. That's the limit. If you go over these limits, things are likely to get kicked back. I'm sure things slip through, sometimes, depending on how QC is working. But in general, that's why these specs are important. So neg 18, neg 1, true peak. Full frequency content should not be present in the low frequency effects channel. Okay, this is a important one. I have heard stories that Apple is checking this quite a bit. I've heard things from engineers who have had mixes kicked back because the QC somewhere, I think with Apple, found content at like 400 hertz that was 80 dB down. I mean, really, that's a little ridiculous. Why do they care? Like, this is a silly one for them to care about, in my opinion. But it is a best practice to filter your LFE. That's something that Dolby recommends. You should have it filtered between 100, probably, and 120 hertz. 150 you could probably go up to, but somewhere in there you definitely want to filter it, and they will kick it back if you have content way above that. Something that's interesting here in the Apple one is they don't specify what their cutoff is, which would be nice to know. For albums where gapless playback is intended between tracks, each track boundary must be no more than half a frame, 1,000 samples, earlier or later than the track boundary in the corresponding stereo deliverable. This one's a little interesting as it's with the album tracks. Basically, they want the stereo stuff to match up with the Atmos stuff, or the Atmos stuff to match up with the stereo stuff. For a long time, the main requirement was the Atmos deliverable needs to be within 50 milliseconds in length of the stereo version. That works out to about 2 frames if you are at 24 frames per second time code, which is what you should be using for Atmos music. That's what they recommend. If you're doing Atmos for video, it's going to be a whole different thing. You've got to go with whatever the video is using. So in this case, with this gapless playback spec, they're really just trying to maintain the gapless nature of the stereo. So just, you want to get the Atmos as close as you possibly can to the stereo. I think you're probably going to be safe if you're within 50 milliseconds, since that was the case for a long time. But if you can get it as sample accurate as possible, that's not going to be a bad thing. So something to keep in mind. This is an important one. Things will get kicked back. One thing I do want to highlight here is this right here. Immersive audio that does not meet the requirements may be removed from Apple Music. I've seen this happening. Some of the earlier Dolby Atmos releases did not conform to these delivery specs or any specs because the specs weren't there right from the start. I have seen tracks on Apple Music that were available in Atmos. I've seen them disappear, the Atmos versions anyways, and it's probably related to that. It's too bad too, because some of those songs were great Atmos mixes, and it's kind of frustrating for me that I can't listen to them in Atmos anymore. And I just hope that those artists, they have their Atmos engineers get them to conform. In most cases, it was just a loudness issue. Hopefully they can get that stuff changed and get those mixes back out. All right, we don't need to worry about 5.1 surround and 7.1 surround because we're really just talking about Atmos today. Best practices for immersive audio content. You know, this is good stuff to look through as well. See, here we go, down here in best practices. The difference between the most recently delivered, new or update, stereo source and immersive source durations must be less than or equal to 50 milliseconds. It's still a thing. There you go. Before we look at some label stuff, what's the best way to look at whether you are in spec? Well, the main thing that we're worrying about with Atmos is the loudness specs. That's the big one in most cases. You need a loudness meter. I've been using this decibel meter from Process Audio a bunch lately. The thing that I like about it is you get this kind of history that you can add. And by the way, I built this kind of view for things in here. You can customize this to show you exactly what you want. But what I like in here is if I blow up my true peak and go past that -1 limit, it will put a little marker there and I can figure out roughly where is that in the song so that I can go back and address it. The true peak thing, especially if you use center channel like I like to do, that true peak thing can really bite you more so, I think, even than the loudness side of things. So that's why I like this. The downside to all of these loudness measurements is to find out if you're in Spec, you've got to play through the whole thing all in one shot. I actually did a video on checking loudness offline while you're mixing. I have some SoundFlow scripts on that, and you can check out that video if you want to find out more. I looked at a lot of different loudness meters, and one of the things that can be a little frustrating is they're not all exactly the same. I mean, for the most part, I think they were all within like 0.1, 0.2 dB, but when you're counting decibels, which unfortunately sometimes you have to do with these delivery specs, you got to look at that. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to err on the side of too much. I mean, if my integrated loudness is like neg 18.2, that's fine. I'm not going to chase that 0.2 dB. But what you don't want is you don't want to see a measurement that's like neg 17.9, which, you know, it'd be nice if there was a little bit of flexibility for that kind of stuff, just because these meters don't all measure the same. But I definitely want to make sure that I am conforming in that case. In the case of being just a tiny bit over, I would err on the side of turning things down. So this is what I use when I'm mixing. When I have a finished master, I always check it in the Dolby Atmos external renderer. If I'm doing an album project, I would put it into the album assembler because you can measure loudness in there. My thinking, though, is the renderer's version of loudness measurement, that is the quote-unquote most right version. I can also kick out a loudness report on this so that I can prove I am within specs if things get kicked back to me. But I've got an ADM of something I did for an artist last year, I think. And if I just hit, I think it's Command L, it's in the, if we just go to, where is it? Loudness analysis right here under input and master. That'll pull up a window. Just hit analyze loudness. So it takes a little bit, but right here I can see neg 18 LKFS integrated. I'm right within that spec. My true peak is at neg 3.3. So again, I'm safe on that. And I would hope so, because this was the master that got delivered for this particular song, and it is up on Apple Music. Let's jump over. Let's just give a quick look at Universal's delivery specs, because they have some stuff that's a little bit different. Dolby Atmos audio servicing asset specifications. Here we go. You know, again, this is basically the same as Apple's. 24 frames per second frame rate. Apple didn't specify that. UMG has that. Bit depth 24, 48K for sample rate. They want a 96K version if you are working in 96K. They don't want you to upsample though. 5.1 downmix mode. Now this is where Universal gets very specific. They want you to use direct render. This is annoying to me because personally, I think direct render with room balance sounds better. This is something that you adjust in your trims and down mixes, by the way. Max integrated loudness, neg 18, max true peak, neg 1. So there you go. Very similar to the Apple side of things. They've got some additional notes down here. So they're saying with the LFE, you need to be between 100 and 150 hertz with your filter. Other stuff they've got in here, they don't want your integrated loudness to go below neg 31. So don't go over neg 18, but don't go below 31 either. And they get a little more specific here in telling you what to do using the 5.1 down mix, but that's a standard it's not a universal only spec. They are just spelling it out, probably for music producers who this is kind of new to. No empty object channels. That's a big one. And when you are getting a final ADM ready for delivery, you should re-import it into your DAW. Make sure you don't have anything in there that has no audio in it, aside from maybe bed channels. If you've got objects in there that have no audio, get rid of them. UMG will kick it back. Apple probably won't, but it is a good practice to not have that in there. Something I've talked about is I wouldn't be surprised if in the future some of the distribution costs have to do with the size of ADM files you're delivering, and delivering the smallest file possible is going to give you a leg up, and that means getting rid of any channels, objects that you're not using. Binaural metadata assignments should not all be set to mid with UMG. Just change one and you meet their QC. I don't know which one you want to change, but pick the bed channels you're not using and change those. It's kind of a silly thing in there, but I get why they've got that. So anyways, that's UMGs. They actually have a more in-depth document. I mean, if we click on this, it's going to pull up, I think it's a PDF, and this gets into a lot more specific stuff for UMG. And this is specific to UMG. These are not requirements for all Atmos releases. This is only if you're delivering to UMG. Different labels have their own requirements. So they've got file naming requirements and other stuff here. If you're doing something to a label, talk to the label, get a copy of their delivery specs, just check and see if they have some. And if they do, make sure you get them, because you don't want stuff kicked back from QC. It sucks. I think getting stuff kicked back for QC is worse than getting mix revisions for some reason. I don't know why. It's QC, that's like tax collection. It sucks. Follow the specs that are out there. So that's UMG. You can click on this link. You can check out what Sony's are and compare. But the main ones you want to meet if you are just doing stuff for independent artists or indie labels that don't have any delivery specs, start with Apple specs. Then I would check with whoever they're going to use for file distribution and see if they have some other delivery specs, because they might have some requirements that are a little different or in addition to what Apple wants for Dolby Atmos. Dolby Atmos delivery specs, there you go. I don't know if there's much more I can say. I've already said too much, and I hope you're still awake. And if you made it this far, seriously, thank you for watching and sticking in for this. This is the least exciting aspect of Dolby Atmos. This is not fun, but it's a part of doing this. If you got questions about delivery specs, if there is something I didn't cover or that I missed that you think people should know, put it in the comments down below. And, there we go. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.